We have a wonderful speaker here, and Michele Chynoweth is an author. I honestly, Michele, I knew nothing about you. I just kept seeing coming over my transom there was someone who was speaking to Christian groups about an author speaking to Christian groups about these biblically oriented novels. And I said, well, that's very interesting. And then pretty soon I got from the same kind of email, I'd get things about real estate. And she was actually, well, the fact of the matter is, Michele Chynoweth is a woman who has had, like a lot of folks, a lot of life that she's gone through. And along the way, addiction affected her life as well. And during that time, she came to know that there was a higher power, there was someone who was greater than she was, that she needed to tune into. And then she ran into a pastor who told her, you know who that higher power is, Jesus Christ, and you need to commit your life to Him. And she found that she needed to not just know Him here, but know Him here. And she did. She came to know Him. And along the way, she began to utilize, she was a trained journalist and had worked in television and radio and print, had been a part of our local newspaper here, the News Journal, had been a part of WBAL out of Baltimore, a television station, and many other locations. But she says, you know, I can write. And so she was putting her hand to it, and she took something that's very dear to us. She took the stories that are the true stories found in the Bible, and she began to rewrite them in contemporary concepts and turned them into biblically based novels. And she's lectured, she talked about this in front of lots of different Christian women's groups and Christian writers groups. I just thought, we have a unique thing to tell that is also biblically based. And it would be great to hear from someone who's a little bit out of our box, but how she puts it all together. And so I asked Michele, would you please talk about how you put these novels together? Would you talk to us about how you tell a biblical story in a new way, contemporary way, to communicate good things, good news? Michele Chynoweth, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Reverend Tom, Sunday Breakfast Mission, and all of you gathered here today for the conference. I'd like to share with you the power of sharing your story. And I'm going to start with a true story. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up in a cold sweat, my mind racing, my heart pounding. Suddenly, I felt nauseous. I rushed to the bathroom, and I didn't even recognize the person staring back at me in the mirror when I caught a glimpse of her. What had happened to me? What happened the night before? All I knew was that I needed to get sober. I had a problem with alcohol, and I needed to find a solution. I was sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. That was the story I heard one night at a recovery meeting from another alcoholic who shared how she got sober. It was identical to my story. Hearing her story, relating to what she said, and knowing there was hope, helped save my life. Ladies and gentlemen, there's power in your story too. Power to make a difference, to bring healing and hope. And who knows, yes, maybe even to save a life. Fast forward 6 years from then, I was sober, divorced, and about to marry my soulmate. After the church service that morning, we were sitting at lunch in a Pizza Hut with our pastor, who was giving us pre-marriage counseling. Toward the end of the session, Pastor Ron turned to me and asked, "Michele, have you been saved?" Now, being raised Catholic, being saved is more of a process through the sacraments. Lifelong journey, you might say. But still, I was curious, so I asked, "What do you mean?" He said, being spiritually saved means believing with all your heart and soul that you've been completely forgiven of all your sins through the Lord Jesus Christ. I said, I think so. I'm not sure. So he said, let's do it now. And we sat together and we prayed. And afterward, I felt a really strong sense of peace wash over me. I was saved in a Pizza Hut. I like to tell that story because it shows that anyone, anytime, anywhere can be saved.
Amen.
I like to think that my husband-to-be and I were destined to be together. We both brought a lot of baggage into the marriage. I had 3 kids, he had 2, and all 5 were teenagers at the time. Together with our dog, we had 3 girls and 3 boys, the Brady Bunch. We also had a built-in wedding party. I envisioned the perfect day. We would get married on the beach in Rehoboth at sunset. The girls would wear their pink dresses, the boys their pink ties. There was only one glitch. Just 2 weeks before the big day, my stepdaughter Morgan, who was 14, got mad at us and decided she wasn't going to be in the wedding. This was a problem. The night before, at the rehearsal, Morgan sat up in the dunes sulking while the rest of us practiced going down the beach aisle to the altar. I was ready to wring her neck. But wait, before I did anything drastic, maybe I should talk to Pastor Ron, right? So after the rehearsal, I pulled Pastor Ron on the side. I was beside myself in a panic. I said, "The wedding's tomorrow. What do we do here?" He said, "Just be calm, hang in there, pray about it. It'll be all right." Really? That's all you got, Mr. Saved? But I decided to trust Pastor Ron and to trust God, and I did get on my knees that night and pray. And guess what? Lo and behold, Morgan was in the wedding the next morning. Sometimes my stories make people laugh and sometimes cry, but often I find they help other people who are struggling with the same situations, whether it's to get sober, to marry into a blended family, to raise difficult teenagers, and sometimes even to find their calling or their purpose in life. Let me tell you that story. It was in one of my darkest days. I was driving along. I'll never forget, I was on Route 40 in Aberdeen, Maryland, when I looked up and I saw a neon sign that read, "Used Books and Bibles." When a thought hit me seemingly from out of the blue, like a still small voice, it said, "Michele, you should write a modern day story, a novel based on the book of Job in the Bible." At the time, I wasn't a big Bible reader, although I was familiar with the story of Job, a guy who had everything and then through a series of tragic events lost everything and questioned God, why me? And then held on to a shred of faith and was redeemed in the long run. Still, I thought, how is that book going to make me a rich and famous author? Because at the time, I thought that was my purpose. So I resisted the idea, but it wouldn't let go. 8 years later, I finally finished writing the book and got it published. And I look back now and see God was tapping me on the shoulder, bringing me through my own Job-like trials and tribulations. I was losing my marriage through a bitter divorce. I was losing my business, an ad agency, through the recession of the 90s. I felt like I was losing my kids who were about to become teenagers, and I was losing my health through the disease of alcoholism. But just like Job, God brought me through to the other side. And I'm happy to report that today I'm married to a wonderful man. We have a great relationship with all 5 of our kids and 2 grandkids. I'm living the dream of being an author of Christian fiction, a speaker, a book coach, and Lord willing, next month I'll have 15 years in recovery.
Amen.
Praise God. Thank you. That book became The Faithful One, and I went on to write several other novels. The Peacemaker, based on the story of David and Abigail in the first book of Samuel. The Runaway Prophet, based on the book of Jonah. And about to come out this summer, The Jealous Son, based on the story of Cain and Abel. I say loosely based on my 2 sons, who are 27 and 29 now. In being an author, I soon was asked to speak at various groups, women's groups, church groups, book clubs, Bible studies. And I started to realize that my books were not only helping me, but helping other people hear God's message. After one discussion on The Faithful One, a lady came up to me and said, "Michele, after reading your book, I decided to go back to church." I was blown away. After another discussion on The Peacemaker, which is about Abigail, who's originally married to Nabal, a mean, narcissistic, abusive alcoholic, before she marries King David. They say write what you know. A young lady came up and took my hand and said, "I think I'm married to the same guy you used to be married to. Can we talk?" I started to discover that my calling, my purpose, wasn't about being a rich and famous author. It was about helping other people through my stories. Whether you're writing or speaking or leading a mission, there's power in your stories too. So I'd like to share with you some tips to tell your story more effectively. Jesus says in Matthew 18, "If a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others on the hills and go out to search for the one that is lost? And if he finds it, the man is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 sheep that were never lost. In the same way, it is not my heavenly Father's will that even one of these little ones should perish." We need to focus on the one. We need to be personal when we tell our stories of what we're all about in our missions. I had an epiphany recently as a book coach when I was sitting down with one of my clients and he was telling me his story. The epiphany was that God is putting a lot of nonfiction writers in my path to help them get their books out into the world. I help with editing, proofing, publishing, and marketing books. I teach a class at Cecil College on those topics. And I realized God is starting to put nonfiction writers in my path, authors of memoirs, how-to books, self-help books, because I can help them as a fiction writer to incorporate stories into their books and more powerfully get their point across. One client, his name's Larry Scanlon, recently got his book published. It's called Business Practices, Biblical Promises. And he talks about several concepts, how we can tie our business practices into the promises in the Bible by being ethical in the workplace, by balancing work and life, by making better business decisions based on biblical principles, and by setting priorities in our lives. He was writing about that last concept, and he had a story, but he left it out of the book because he was a little bit ashamed. He had been offered a position as the director of the board of directors of a hospital. It would pull him out of retirement, but he really wanted to take the position. It was good for his ego. But his wife was home suffering from an illness. So he struggled with that decision and almost took the position. But he decided in the long run to stay home with his wife and turned it down. He was embarrassed that he struggled so much with that decision, but I said, Larry, that's the story you need to put in your book, because people will relate to that story. We all struggle with decisions like that. Another writer that I helped, Vince, that I'm helping now, is writing a book on success, and he's patterning the steps of success to building a house. And I read the first draft of his manuscript, and it was pretty dry. And I said, why are you writing this book on success when there are hundreds of books on success out there? And he said, let me tell you a story on how I got to be where I am. I started out as a kid in school being bullied and made fun of. I was small, skinny, scrawny, and painfully shy. I was that one that they bullied. I had a dream, though, of becoming a bodybuilder. And after school each day, I would sneak out and work out in the gym. And little by little, I built up my muscles, but I also built up my confidence. Today, he's a successful engineer and leader of a management team at Delmarva Power here in Delaware, and he's writing this book. And I said, Vince, forget about the house building, tell that story. That's a story we can relate to. All of us as kids had low self-esteem and a hole in our soul and felt a little out of place at times. We can all relate to that story. So we need to be personal in our story. Just like Jesus tells us in the gospel. Now recently I went to see the musical Jesus in Lancaster at the Sight and Sound Theater. Has anybody seen it? It was out all that. It was phenomenal. And I started crying at this one song called To Rescue the One. In that scene, Jesus goes up on the mountain. He leaves his tribe, the apostles, to go rescue a man who's possessed by demons. We all remember that story. And in the song, the apostles are singing to one another. One says, because they're wondering, why is he going up there to rescue this crazy man? And one says, he called me by name. I was under that tree. He came just to find me. He told me who I am. He called me by name. I waited by the city. He came and calmed the storm inside me, and life began. And he came to rescue the one. He left the 99 when you were the one, and you were the one. He left the 99 when I was the one, and now that man is the one. It's all about rescuing the one. We need to focus on the individual. And Jesus did this in his ministry, right? The song goes on to say, like that woman at the well, that small man hiding under the tree, the lame man lowered through the roof, the bleeding woman in the street, the deaf man, the blind man, the sick and the lame, the poor and the broken. He knows their name. Jesus ministers to individual souls. Even the Old Testament stories, which my books focus on, because I feel like sometimes they're hard to read and comprehend. I think the New Testament stories are just fine the way they are. And I'm not trying to rewrite Old Testament stories, more so reimagine them for readers today in a modern day way so that they can comprehend that message, and I hope come back to the Bible story with a whole fresh sense of understanding. Even the Old Testament stories, though, the ones that really hit us hard are the ones about people. The ones about David, Jonah, Cain and Abel, Job. Books and movies that are highly successful also tend to focus on character, and they become successful as a result. One of my favorites is Sound of Music. It's based on a true story in a book. It's about Nazi Germany occupying Austria. But the reason it grabs us, and it's been a classic over the years, is because it focuses on the Von Trapp family and Maria, who's a nun, but then comes to be a nanny for the children and ends up their mother. It focuses on their story and her story. Another favorite of mine is The Shawshank Redemption, based on a book by Stephen King, and it's about a story about a guy who was imprisoned falsely accused, and ends up over 20 years in the Shawshank prison, and it's an awful story, but luckily has a happy ending. But we love the movie because it focuses on Andy Dufresne, the guy imprisoned, and how he was transformed over time and was able to be set free. Done wonderfully by Tim Robbins. We see in the Gospels how Jesus transforms individuals, right? That's the story we need to tell as missionaries, as people furthering our mission. But how do we show transformation? You might be wondering. As writers, we talk about something called character arc. Character arc is the status of a character as he or she unfolds through the story, through a series of episodes that affect change. You might say the plot twists and turns. Remember, people are always asking, why should they care? Why should I care about your book, about your mission? Why should I donate? The more they feel about something or someone, the more they care. And the more they'll invest in your story and in your mission. I have character arc and transformation in all of my books, but I want to talk a little bit about The Faithful One, my first book, and show how we need to be personal and show that transformation. So in my book, Job is played by Seth Jacobs, and he's an everyday guy like the rest of us, although he's a little bit more maybe well off. He's healthy, wealthy, good looking, has a beautiful wife, wonderful children, successful restaurant career, a mansion in Greater Boston. Okay, he has a little bit better than the rest of us. But a series of tragic events happen to Seth, just like they did to Job. And he questions his faith. Why are these bad things happening to me, a good person? He starts out in the book relatively happy and content and confident. Everything's going right in his life. But he really does question his faith. And at one point says, God, just kill me already because this is awful. I'd rather die. I curse the day I was born. And he's transformed when, in my book, when a social worker talks to him and helps him to see who are we to question God's ways. He's transformed and he becomes more humble, more grateful, and more faithful in the end. So how do we show transformation or character arc? That leads me to my second tip for you. We need to be more descriptive. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, do not worry about your life, what you eat or drink or what you will wear. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Look at the flowers in the field. They're beautiful, right? They don't worry about what they're wearing. Jesus is getting across the concept not to worry, not to be anxious, and we all face that, right? Jesus taught us with these images. Sheep, birds, flowers, a mustard seed, vine and branches, salt of the earth. We don't want to lose our flavor. He used everyday images to reach out to us and to get his message across. The story of the prodigal son is another good example. In my classes and at writers' conferences where I speak, I talk about we need to show, not tell. I say it over and over to my students. And there's power in your words, in the words you choose to use. To show, not tell means to be descriptive with your words. Use your 5 senses right now. How does something look, sound, feel, taste, smell? Ask yourself those questions when you go to write the story that you're going to get out there about your mission, about the one. Use specificity, specific words, action verbs, I tell my students. And paint a picture. Has anybody seen the YouTube video, The Power of Words? I want you to go home tonight and call it up, or go back to your hotel room. It's a great video, short video that really has an impact. It's about a blind man who's begging in the street. And people pass him by and throw a few coins here and there, but not much. His sign reads, "Need help, I'm blind." So again, people pass by, a few people throw some money in his tin cup, and then this young lady stops by. And she goes back and she bends down and picks up his sign, and she takes a marker and she crosses out the words. Then she rewrites some other words on the other side and sits down the sign. Pretty soon, people are passing by, throwing money into the tin cup. She comes back a few hours later, and he knows she's there because he can feel her shoes. And he says, "Thank you. I don't know what you did to help." And she says, "I said the same thing, only differently." And we see the sign. It's a beautiful day, but I can't see it. And it just grabs you because you realize it's all about the words. We want to put a face on our stories, right? And another tip is to think like a movie director. I do this in The Peacemaker. I do this in all my books, actually, but I picked The Peacemaker to talk about because it's a modern-day story of David and Abigail. In it, and I touched on that briefly earlier, in it, the Nabal character, his name is Darren Richards, is running for President of the United States against the David character, Leif Mitchell, who's a country rock singer and a horse rancher, shepherd in a modern-day way, and a psalmist. And Chessa is originally married to Darren Richards, and she starts to see that he's not such a nice guy behind the scenes. She has to muster up the courage to make peace between them when the campaigns get really ugly, like they do in political elections today, and to save Leif from stooping to her husband's level when the campaigns get really ugly and harming a lot of other innocent people. So I think, which actors and actresses would I choose to play my characters in the book? And I hold on to those images when I'm writing the book. So to play Chessa, I picked Keira Knightley. She has that doe-eyed, innocent look about her when she starts out. I mean, she is young and falls in love with this senator from New York. But she also has an inner strength about her and finds that courage to do what she needs to do. To play Darren Richards, he's a powerful, good-looking senator who's running for president, but he has a little bit of a sinister side. I picked Ben Affleck, and I just keep these images in mind when I'm developing my characters. Maybe they'll actually play the book when it's in a movie, we're hoping. They're not too old. And to play Leif Mitchell, guess who I picked? An everyday, likable guy, also good looking, David was. I picked Matt Damon. So this helps me to visualize, and maybe you can, when you're writing your story and you're answering those questions, what does this look like? Who is this guy about? Who am I helping? You can visualize that person. And maybe for you, it's a real person. You're going to hear tonight the story of Joe, who is the kitchen director, by the way, the food service director at Sunday Breakfast Mission. Joe, I'm not going to tell you much, but Joe came off the street and worked his way up to be the food service director. He came in off the street like I did, and I can relate to that story, like a lot of people do who are down and out on their luck. But he worked hard, and he came to believe in God and read the Bible and get those messages and work his way up. I'll let him tell you that story, but the way I heard it was when I first met Reverend Tom at Sunday Breakfast Mission. I came in to talk about me, and we were talking about formulating my keynote, and I took a tour of Sunday Breakfast Mission, and I knew what Sunday Breakfast Mission was all about. I get the envelopes and I donate. I live close to Delaware. But I really learned what it was all about when I heard Tom tell me the story of Joe. That's what we need to do with our stories and our missions. When Jesus comes to save people, Matthew says this. When Jesus called Matthew a tax collector, the Pharisees questioned him, "Why do you eat with sinners?" Jesus said, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." So who are these sinners today? Well, obviously all of us sitting in the room, right? But I think we need to ask not who are the sinners, but who are the people who need our help? Who are the people out there today, all around us? Who does Jesus want to save through us? Who needs saving? And how do we portray them in our modern world? And that brings me to my third tip. We need to be real when we tell those stories. In my book, The Runaway Prophet, based on Jonah, I have a book trailer, and I use several images to portray the people in Las Vegas. The book is set in Las Vegas, the new Nineveh, and my Jonah character, Rory Justice, is called out there to work with the FBI in Las Vegas. He wants no parts of it, by the way, because he doesn't want to work with the drug addicts and the gambling addicts and the gang members and the prostitutes. He wants no part of it because he has a bad past himself. So instead, he mails a letter that he was supposed to hand deliver to the authorities in Las Vegas and jumps on a cruise ship instead. And I won't tell you the rest, you'll have to read it. But here's the thing. We don't even have to look in Las Vegas to find the people who need saving, right? They're right here, right outside of this hotel, and on our streets and in our cities and towns. Every day we read in the headlines about the opioid crisis. You look up and you see a billboard that says, "Got a gambling addiction? Here's an 800 number to call." We see troubled youth from broken homes who join gangs just to belong, and the awful things that happen as a result, winding up in jail or worse. And unfortunately, these days we see a lot of girls, innocent victims that are victims of sex trafficking rings that end up on the streets through no fault of their own. These are the faces of the people that we need to save. So we need to be real and show today's world. And I think I illustrated that by talking a little bit about the runaway prophet. So next, I would encourage you to find your particular message of your individual mission. We're all in mission work, right? But each of our ministries and missions is maybe a little different from one another. So you need to focus on your unique mission. Who does it help? What is your main purpose? And you're going to hear me go through the 5 W's and H. As Tom said, I used to be a news reporter. I actually started out at a small paper in my hometown in Bel Air, Maryland, and then I worked my way up. I went actually down to Salisbury, Maryland to work for the Daily Times, and then I ended up here at the News Journal in Wilmington. I was a reporter covering the county government beat many years ago. I won't tell how many. And we would write stories based on who, what, when, where, why, and how. So it's helpful, I think, at least for me, but hopefully for you too, to when you try to find your message, to ask yourself these questions. Who does it help? What is your main purpose? When is a good time to ask for help? It might be Thanksgiving when people are hungry and need meals. It might be Easter. It might be any time at all. And where are the people you should target? Are they right here in Wilmington? Are they, I know we have people from all over the country, Indiana, New Jersey, or are they nationwide, or are they global? Where are those people that we need to help? And where are the people that you want to ask to help? Where do they live? Who is your target audience? And why should they help? Again, you need to make them care and feel. And ask yourself, how does your mission help others? And I encourage you to write the true story of one person who got help, if you haven't done so already. And then tell that story out loud to another person and ask how it makes them feel. And if they shed a tear or they connect with you, you know that that story is doing its job. And I'd like to encourage you to use your stories in your marketing platform. Hopefully, some of you are doing that. I know Sunday Breakfast Mission is great about getting its message out through marketing. But some of you may be new, so I'd like to share some tips. After I was a news reporter, I went into marketing. I was an ad agency owner. I worked for an ad agency here in Wilmington, and then owned my own company for several years, and then was a marketing director for a corporate firm here in Delaware before being a full-time author, speaker, and book coach. That's why Tom got those real estate messages. And I want to share with you some tips on the marketing. We need to be consistent with our message in our branding, our logos, our look of our website, and everything we put out there. Literature, it needs to be consistent with our message and that story. We have social media today, which is great. I know some of you are saying, oh, I'll never go on Twitter. I said that too. And I finally had to go on and use it as a marketing platform. I don't go on every day, but choose one or two, maybe even one, to get your message out. Maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's YouTube. YouTube's a great platform for getting videos out there. Maybe you want to try writing a blog. It's not that hard, and it's free. Just set up WordPress and you write a blog about the different stories that you have for the individuals that you are trying to help. Or maybe it's the story of your mission and you, and how you came to be about leading your mission. It might be your story. There are email newsletters you can send and various email campaigns. And of course, public and media appearances. TV, radio, podcasts, videos, again, the YouTube channel. These are all vehicles that are free for the most part that you can take advantage of to get your story out there. And like Tom told you, I was in radio and television, and I've done lots of author interviews since then. This is me with Gus Lloyd from Seize the Day with Gus Lloyd on the Catholic channel, Sirius XM 129. He interviewed me for each of my books, and then we went on a pilgrimage tour to Italy. So I was fortunate to be in the Italian countryside to be interviewed, and that's us sitting just outside of Rome. It was wonderful. And this was an interview on Delmarva Life in Salisbury on WBOC, the NBC affiliate down there. And that was when I went to Keynote at Vine and Vessels conference down in Georgetown, Delaware. So you need to take pictures, take videos, get your message out there. And one underlying theme of all of this is that most effective marketing means putting yourself out there through public speaking. Now, I've done several gigs over the years. Started out, like I said, with small women's groups and Bible studies and book clubs, and then I started to branch out to speak at writers' conferences of various sizes, and I'm so delighted to be here today to speak to you. I learned that through speaking, as I went through the process, what makes you a powerful speaker is that you connect with the audience. Remember how I told my personal story in the beginning, and you laughed a little, and maybe some of you could relate? That's how you connect with the audience. Maya Angelou, philosopher and author, says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel." And I think she's right. But who has a fear of public speaking? Raise your hand. Oh, there's a few of you out there. Comedian Jerry Seinfeld says, according to most studies, people's #1 fear is public speaking. #2 is death. Wait a minute, death is #1? Does that sound right? This means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than you are delivering the eulogy. How is that? But I think it's true. I know people that would rather have all their teeth pulled than to speak, my husband being one of them. He said, "You go for it, Michelle. You know, better you than me." But I think it's an innate fear in most of us, in our DNA. When I started out, I was terrified. I am nervous even today. It's an innate nervousness that comes about with public speaking. But the more you do it, the more you connect and get your message out there, the more you speak, the easier it becomes. So I just want to share a few tips on overcoming your fear of public speaking. One thing I did was to join Toastmasters, and there's Toastmasters clubs all over the country, all over the world. It's Toastmasters International. I think it's in 122 countries now across the world, and there are clubs. There are like a dozen clubs right here in Wilmington. So to join Toastmasters, you practice speaking over and over in front of your peers, and you eventually become better at it, and let's hope, and lose your fear of public speaking. And the way they do this is to have you practice, practice, practice. But that's how you become good at anything, right? To practice over and over again. Sports, missions, writing books. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. Another tip is to pray, right? To pray about the message. I asked the Holy Spirit to enter me, and I thank Pastor Greg for his message this morning. I said that really connected with me to remember it's not about me. It's not about really what I even have to say. It's about God speaking through me. So I prayed to deliver the message that you need to hear. Jesus says, "Be not afraid. Peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid." That's the gospel message. But I have one other practical tip, and that is to strike a power pose. Harvard law professor Amy Cuddy did a TED talk on this and said, just like our minds change our bodies, you know how you're feeling stressed and break out in a cold sore or have a headache? Our bodies change our minds, and our minds can change our behavior, and our behavior can change our outcomes. She did a study, and she set up 2 groups of people that were going into a high-powered job interview. The first group, she had strike a power pose, a strong power pose. They were relaxed, confident, strong. The second group, she had do a low power pose. They were closed in and doubtful and fearful and unsure, and measured the levels of hormones in their body. And the first group had a high level of testosterone, which governs our confidence, and a low level of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And the other group had the opposite effect on their hormones. And guess which group did better in the job interview? The first group. So I'd like you all to practice some power poses with me now. So I'd like you all to actually stand up. Oh, we need to shake off that lunch we ate, right? If you can, if you're able. Okay, our first pose, that's right, stretch, is the V for victory pose. This is shown by athletes when they cross the finish line, and strong V, strong stance. It's even shown by blind people when they cross the finish line. They've never even seen it, so it's in our DNA. Now, Amy says we have to hold this pose for several minutes, but I'll let you relax for a minute. So that's one pose. A second one is this one. It's the Wonder Woman pose. So you stand with your hands on your hips, and it's true. If you hold this pose,
The Superman pose.
the Superman pose, or the Wonder Woman. I chose women. If you hold this pose, you pretty much soon are saying, feeling pretty confident and saying, I got this. Okay, for you guys, there's the Mr. Clean pose, crossing your arms high up on your chest, sticking out your chin, and you say, I got this, right? You do. You feel more confident. So for those with a fear of public speaking, try this. And I have one last pose for all of you, all of us believers in the room, and I call it the Amen pose. So I want you to shout it out with me. Amen! Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all. I'll be out at my table out there with my books. I'd love for you to stop by or connect with me on my website. And I'm here for the duration of the day. I'll be here tonight for dinner. So I hope to chat with all of you. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. Great work. Thank you.